Hello and welcome to a super special episode of Digital Marketing Masterclass, a podcast dedicated to collecting insights of the marketing world's leading thought leaders to teach you the ideal system for generating leads, nurturing leads into clients, and converting clients into raving fans of your company, brand, and vision. On today's show, Todd and I sit down with Marcus Sheridan. Marcus is the author of They Ask, You Answer, which has been named one of the 5 best marketing books of all time by Book Authority. He's called a web marketing guru by the New York Times, and today, Sheridan is a highly sought out global speaker and consultant in the digital sales and marketing space. He has worked with hundreds of businesses and brands to achieve their potential in a rapidly evolving marketplace. Marcus is a part of Impact River Pools and Marcus Sheridan International. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about the 5 huge mistakes that businesses make with their approach to sales and marketing. So without further ado, Internet, please give a warm welcome to Marcus Sheridan. Marcus, welcome to the show.
Thrilled to be here. Chris and Todd, it's a pleasure.
This is wonderful. So I have a mission, and what I'm trying to do with our podcast is I'm trying to reach out to probably the top 100 most influential content marketers. And every time I end the show, I usually say, hey, who else should we be speaking to? And I think we're about 20 guests in, and I don't think I've had a single guest not say, you got to speak to Marcus. You are, when it comes to content marketing, you are absolutely the man.
Thank you. It's been a fun journey.
Yeah, and so it didn't start out that way. Obviously, we're going to probably talk a little bit about, the pools, because that's pretty much your calling card. But, when it comes to content marketing, writing the book and all that stuff like that, it's got to be a whirlwind between starting out where you started to where you are now. Tell me just a little bit in your own words, kind of talk to me a little bit about your journey. We're going to unpack the pool thing in the show, but it's been a wild ride. So where are you at now?
Well, I mean, the whole thing has been a wild, ride, which is, I'm going to give the very quick 20-year version of the story, if I could. So, graduated college, fell in with the swimming pool company. My 2 buddies had just started it. I was working in the retail side. Within a few months, they said, hey, do you want to become an owner of the company with us, a partner? I was like, okay. And 2008 rolls around, market crashes. I think we're going to lose the business. We're in big trouble. And that's when I started to really lean into the internet and read about things like inbound marketing, content marketing, social media, blogging, all that stuff. And what I heard in my simple pool guy mind was, Marcus, if you just obsess over your customers' questions, you might save your business. And so I literally became obsessive about our customers' questions, worries, fears, issues, concerns, started addressing them on the website. And the website, within the next 2 years, would become the most trafficked swimming pool website in the world. I started to talk about, to anybody that would listen, what I was doing, because this stuff was working. And before I knew it, I started having companies say, hey, could you teach us how to do this? And then other companies would say, hey, could you share that at my event, like Joe Polizzi, for example, who you've had on the show. And it ended up, They Ask, You Answer, becoming a book, a bestseller. I've spoken all over the world, and over 150,000 copies have now sold in multiple languages. And it's really cool because now I'm starting to see a ton of case studies come through. Different companies telling me about these amazing experiences they've had, becoming the most trusted voice in their space.
That's really cool. So let me just ask you one question that I've always just wondered. So, I've heard the pool story a number of different times. The first time I actually heard about it was in Jay Baer's book, Utility. I think, did you write the foreword to that, or?
I wrote the foreword to Jay's book. Yep. Oh, and Utility is such a good book, by the way, just because he really, that mindset of being utilitarian is so beautiful and so accurate to this day. That'll never grow old.
Yeah, and one of the questions I had for you was about speed. So, you talk about in your book, you're like saying, hey, I'm calling this bank number to find out, oh my gosh, I'm overdrawn. We're overdrawn, right? And then from there, you lose about 5 different clients overnight.
Yep.
But to write all this stuff down, right? That takes time and stuff like. In other words, like I think that the knee-jerk reaction I would say is, hey, the house is on fire. The quickest buckets are sales, sales, sales. And I was just surprised that you went in, you dove full, both feet into marketing. But like I was always worried about the speed element to that, because let's say hypothetically I'm talking about Google. It would take significant time to index and to rank. Were you also using email marketing to get some of these ideas out? Like, what did you do from a triage standpoint of like, it's cool, we have this content that answers questions, but how did you get it out?
Well, so the way I saw it was, okay, we're probably going to lose the company. I've got nothing to lose. And I need, post 2008, 2009, the leads were way down in luxury industries like swimming pools. People just didn't have the ability to get loans anymore because the housing bubble bursted. And so I knew that the internet was changing the world. I knew that we didn't have a lot of other options. If I couldn't generate leads, it didn't matter how I was doing from a sales standpoint. I had to generate some leads. And so my biggest initiative was you need to figure this out as quickly as possible. And so I produced one article that went on the website every day for almost 2 years. And I would start writing usually around 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. And I would go till 12 or 1 in the morning. And again, I did that for 2 straight years. Now, the results, though, Chris, started to happen within 3 to 6 months. I knew I was onto something because people started calling me up and saying, man, I just want to thank you for talking about the stuff that nobody else is willing to talk about, especially when it came to cost and price, right? I mean, we were the first ones to do that. That started some pretty immediate returns. And it's not always the case in every industry, especially those that are saturated with content. I call that in the book the CSI, the Content Saturation Index. But if you think about pools, it's a blue-collar market. Blue-collar industries are pretty easy to dominate online because, they're just not thinking like the customer. They're not using the internet like they could and they should be as a whole. And so we were able to start that domination pretty quickly. It's slower today in 2022, but it still is as important as ever that we're obsessed with our customers' questions, worries, fears, issues, concerns, and we address them. But I'm sure we were doing a lot on the sales front that we could too to keep the business alive, to keep the lights on. It was, there were 70-hour weeks back then.
Sure. Very cool. Todd, you and I were talking about, how Marcus has 2 different books. Let's kind of break into some of the differentiation between book number 1, book number 2, and where we're at now.
Yeah, so I guess for us is, Chris asked the question, book 1 was published, I think, early 2017, and then book 2, mid-2019. So the question Chris came out with, and I think you might be onto something because you talked about all this like data that you're getting back in the form of case studies.
Yep.
Maybe that's book 3, is basically, aggregating all these case studies and sort of, telling the story about, hey, I told you like the principles, I told you sort of how it's done. Here's how it's actually happening and the impact that it's making in different industries.
Yeah, and we've got what I would consider good, even great case studies in the first couple of books. If you look at the difference between the first book and the second book added a ton on video, and that was the big, if I want to do They Ask You Answer, not just from a textual standpoint, but if I want to become the most trusted voice in my space using video, how do I do that? Book number 2 definitely addresses that. And it also talks a little bit more about the perfect They Ask You Answer website. It talks a little bit more about, hey, if I want to create a team that is designed to do this, to become that trusted voice in-house, what does that team need to look like? So we spent a little bit more time on that. Now, what we've seen is some other developments. So, for example, one of the biggest benefits that They Ask You Answer, and this is unbelievably applicable to 2022 and 2023, what it looks like, is HR. In other words, recruiting. So every website at this point, we think about content marketing, we think about marketing and sales. We don't think nearly as much about employee marketing, recruiting marketing as we could be. And so, in a perfect state, every business has a section of their website that is specifically designed to address the fundamental questions, again, worries, concerns, etc., of a potential candidate. So not only should you have a section of your site, a learning center, if you will, for potential customers, but we want another section, separate section, for potential employees, for potential team members that's addressing all those questions. We've had companies now tell us that the biggest benefit of They Ask You Answer wasn't sales and marketing. They were great, but the big benefit was the amount of recruits they got because they were so much more aggressive in talking directly to employees and to job candidates. So I think there's a huge component of that. I also think there is more to talk about with respect to knowing exactly what people are thinking when they come to a website and how to address those needs. In fact, I've got a book coming out later this year with Phil Jones, who is the author of Exactly What to Say. And this book, and I haven't even announced it yet, but it's going to be coming out, and I don't care if it's here, but it's essentially going to be called Exactly What to Say on Your Website, right? And so we're really excited about it because it's the perfect love child of Exactly What to Say plus They Ask You Answer, specific to a company's website.
So I'm sorry, Marcus. Is this like breaking news?
This is actually breaking news. Phil will get mad at me
Yes!
because I haven't shared this. I haven't shared this with anybody yet.
Chris, this is the second time that we broke a new story. Like I don't know what it is, but thank you for being part. I'm so happy to be a part of this.
Well, it's going to be another great book in the Exactly What to Say series. People are going to love it. And it's going to flip the way you see your website on its head because it addresses the most fundamental questions that people have, but websites don't do a great job answering. Let me give an example of one. An example of one might be, are you really any different than everybody else? Because that's exactly how they say it.
Exactly.
Are you really any different than everybody else? So you have to learn exactly how they say the question, and then you can learn exactly how to answer it. And so that's what the book does. It's going to be a lot of fun, and it's coming out as an audiobook first. So that's going to be pretty dope.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. We're flipping
great.
everything on its head.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot more with They Ask You
That sounds
Answer.
like that's what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's just take this triangle and turn it upside down. Let me just take this pool industry and turn it upside down.
It's very fun that way.
Yeah.
I think, though, that there will be multiple evolutions of They Ask You Answer with the same core principle. What happens is platforms evolve and some methodologies evolve. What does not change is the principles. The principles do not change, and we just have to learn to take the principle, let's say in this case, of obsessing over a customer's questions and engendering trust and transparency, and using that in a thing like live chat on your website, right? Using that eventually for any type of VR or augmented this or that or Web3 or whatever the crap comes next, applying those principles over there.
All right, well, that sounds good. And actually, I think that's a really good segue. What we'd like to do is kind of get into some of these principles. So we're gonna kind of position them in the form of, sort of an anti-statement, and then we're just gonna get some feedback from you. So the one thing, and this is kind of near and dear to my heart because I'm in sales, but one of the things that you talk about in your book is that companies are just too salesy, right? There's this push for sales, and I think the argument that you make is that the companies need to be more on the information and education, and then through education you actually build trust. One of my favorite YouTubes that I saw on you was published by Content Marketing Institute, and it was how a pool company used content marketing to save its business, right? 3 or 4 minute video is fantastic, but the line that I loved in that was that everyone in your company is a teacher. So to me, it's like really kind of funny because in the business world, like you'll hear like say, oh, everybody is a salesperson. They're facing the client and they're salespeople, whether it's customer service or salespeople or production people. They're basically customer facing. They're selling something. And I think your argument would be, no, they're teaching, they're informing, they're educating, they're breaking down barriers to promote trust.
If we think about, if you go to most 20, 30 something year olds and you say, other than your parents and family, who's had the biggest influence on your life? They're going to say, teachers. And is it possible that somebody has that same sentiment towards a business? I believe it is possible. And one idea that any company can rally around is that of teaching. If I said to a salesperson or a marketer or somebody on a leadership team or an engineer, hey, in a perfect world, would our customers say that we're some of the best teachers in the world? They're going to say, yeah, of course. That would be great. And so it starts with this mindset to teach. And if you think about a teacher too, what is a teacher like? The best teachers, what do? Well, number one, they communicate in a way that the class can understand what they're saying. So they're not there to sound smart. And I'm really thinking, when I talk about teachers, I'm talking about elementary school teachers. Not even college professors, because sometimes they try to sound smart. Elementary school teachers, they ain't got nobody to impress. Because the kids don't sit there and say, oh, you're so smart. The kids are just like, oh, this is so cool. Light bulb moments, right? So that's number one. Try to say it in a way that everybody understands it. And number two, the great teachers, if little Johnny or little Jenny, if they're raising their hand, they call on them. They don't ignore them. They call on them. So how many questions or how many hands are being raised in your industry right now that are getting ignored? And in every industry, hands are getting ignored. And so the greatest companies speak in a way that all the students, in other words, all the potential customers understand. They're looking for the hands to be raised, and they're going to call on them when the hand is raised. They're not going to ignore them. And it's not about the teacher. The teacher is not the hero. The student is the hero, right? Which is pretty story brandish, right? But that's the idea. And if you can do that in a perfect world, what happens is somebody comes to you, the salesperson or someone like that, and says, you know what? I feel like everything I've learned from you. Everything I learned about pools, Marcus, I learned from you. Everything I learned about content marketing, I learned from you. Like, that to me is a huge win.
Yeah, that's really cool. I have my 5th grade math teacher. She taught me something, and I think this will apply to exactly what you're saying. But she basically said, this is how you know something, is if you can teach it, right? So like, let's just say we took this to your example, like, and you promoted this idea of teaching, right? So now you're basically teaching your clients the material, and if they can teach it internally, maybe it's like to a board or a leadership team. So you're educating them, you're informing them, you're giving them the ammunition to basically go teach it internally and sell it, through the teaching process. And I think that's really strong.
100%.
Yep. And the same thing for me, like, we have a team, about 20 internal people, and like between account managers, project managers, and things like that. And, if they would wrap their minds around that and say, hey, you know what, even if I drop my role as a project manager, account manager, and say, hey, you know what, every challenge you have as a client, let me use this as a teaching opportunity. They can't do that unless they know it themselves to teach, and that forces them to become equipped, to teach as well. So it's interesting how Todd's saying the client's eventually going to have an internal champion who's going to teach. But I think about my own team in operations and saying, hey, you know what? Like, I think I've trained them how to be a great liaison between my production team and, and the client. But I don't know whether I've challenged my people to be teachers.
100%. We think like teachers. It's something we can all rally around. And then we let go of trying to impress. I think it's a beautiful obsession. It's been one of the great obsessions of my life. And of the commonalities of all my careers is teaching. I just started recently a charter fishing company in North Carolina. But what's growing the business is the YouTube channel. What's the YouTube channel called? Saltwater Fishing University. You see what I'm saying? It's the same theme over and over again, over and over again. And it works, man. I mean, it's just beautiful to watch it work.
Yeah, that's really cool. Was that a hobby of yours or like a passion?
Yeah, it's a passion.
Like saltwater fishing?
Major passion area of mine. And it's like, hey, if I can make all the cost of fuel for all my fishing a business expense, why the heck not?
You're covered.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Let me move on real quick, because Todd was outlining, kind of the outline for today's show was kind of like the 7+ huge mistakes that businesses make in sales and marketing. And so the second challenge, or the second problem that we hear and see is, hey, you know what, Marcus, if you're too transparent, you're going to expose your weaknesses, and your potential clients, they're just going to bolt. What do you say to that?
Well, that assumes that people are dumb. And it also assumes that they're uninformed, which somebody might start off their, let's say, buying journey uninformed, but eventually they won't be. In fact, eventually they may know very well more than the actual salesperson they're going to be working with. Something we've all experienced. I mean, the way I like to put it is consumer ignorance is no longer a viable sales and marketing strategy. It was at one time. At one time, we could, pre-circa 1996, 97, when the internet takes off, we could use ignorance to our advantage. Oh, they're not going to find out about that technology, about that option, about that process, about that methodology, whatever the thing is. Today, they're going to find out about it. Now, what's beautiful, though, is when you say to yourself, you know what? My customers, they're intelligent human beings. They're informed. And if they're going to be informed, they may as well learn it from me. The moment you make that shift, your ability to teach them and to address questions and fears and worries they have at a level that is so much higher than that of your competitors. And who's going to win at the end of that day? You are going to win at the end of that day. And so I just go back to this mindset of buyers aren't dumb.
Yeah. And if they are dumb now, they won't be
That's
a couple months into your relationship. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. And you don't want to find out that you pulled the wool over their eyes.
So this is kind of like this is the next one, but it's also very similar to what you just talked about, Chris. So, a lot of what you talk about is education, right? So you're educating your potential buyers about your processes, about your products, maybe like what's good and what's bad, about your products. Is there an element where like you give too much away and there's like this fear that your competitors are basically going to sort of steal, quote unquote, your intellectual property, and then you'll no longer be unique? Like, is that something you've seen or had to address?
Somewhat of a loaded question there. There are
definitely loaded,
very
yes.
few Coca-Colas and KFCs in this world. And in fact, I think there's plenty of chicken recipes that are better than KFC, and Coca-Cola has plenty of knockoffs as well. So my point is there's very few legitimate secret sauces. And the companies that don't sit there and yap all day long about they have proprietary information, technologies, and methodologies, but rather show the thing, they engender way more trust. It's like, at this point, we want to see the sandwich made in front of us. That's what we want as consumers. People used to say that we don't want to see the sausage made. Well, we might not want to see the sausage made, how the sausage is made, but when it comes to what makes a business unique, we do want to see that sausage. And that helps us to verify, yes, this is good, this is true. So an example, with my manufacturing company for my swimming pool company, we manufacture fiberglass pools. I was the first one to show every in and out of manufacturing a fiberglass pool. And all the other manufacturers were like, I can't believe you're showing all this information. They literally said, what are you doing? You're showing the information. And I just sat there and laughed to myself, because what happened as a result? What happened as a result is suddenly homeowners started going to pool builders and saying, I want a river pool. And pool builders are like, well, I don't carry a river pool. I carry such and such product. Yeah, but river pool is the only one that shows exactly how they make their pools. And that's what I want in my backyard. So if you don't carry a river pool, well, then I'm not going to be able to buy from you. And what happens all of a sudden? We get people, pool builders all over the country saying, yeah, I've got this homeowner, and they say they got to have a river pool, and so how do I become a dealer? So how do we become the fastest growing dealer of fiberglass pools in the country without having any regional sales reps? That's how we did it. Because the best sales rep is a homeowner or an end user that goes to a supplier or a wholesaler or a retailer or a manufacturer, whatever you want to call it, and says, I ain't carrying your stuff. I'm not buying from you unless you have such and such a brand. That's the best salesperson I can have. And that's the power to that. Rarely ever have I seen someone, Todd, share too much. Now, when it comes to cost and price, if you just slap a number and you don't explain value, what drives cost up, what drives cost down, why some companies are expensive, why some companies are cheap, yeah, that could have the reverse effect, because it's now commoditizing. But if you educate well, you decommoditize, and that's the whole key to talking about cost and price, is explaining value in the marketplace. So that is an example. So the only time I see it done wrong is because the person didn't teach well. They did a quick vomit of information, but they didn't explain the thing well, and so therefore it didn't work in their favor.
All right, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I especially like the process. Like I agree. Like I don't necessarily, like I look at our business. Like people don't necessarily need to know exactly every single facet of how we do inbound marketing. But what they do need to know is, like, here's all the steps that we're taking, and then here's the value that you're going to get from all those efforts, right? And that's where the education for us comes in. So we kind of have to walk that line with basically, not telling too much, but telling enough that basically
to me, it's like,
allows us to sell value.
What is too much that you could tell them? I don't even think there's too much. Listen, They Ask You Answer has been copied by I don't know how many agencies by this point in the inbound space. I mean, it is far and away the most copied framework that is used. And what happens oftentimes is people will come to me and they'll say, yeah, this one agency was using They Ask You Answer with us. And I said, well, why don't I just come and use the agency that invented the framework in the first place? In other words, I have taught everybody in the world how to use They Ask You Answer, including agencies that we're competing with. I've taught end users how to do it themselves in-house. And like everything else in life, it's no different than most people have heard of the Geek Squad. They fix computer stuff and they have geeks that work for them. Well, they really do a great job of teaching people how to fix their own computers. And somebody once asked the CEO, why do you show everybody how to fix their own computers when you do it? That's what you do. It's your business. He said, don't you realize my number one customer is the one that tries to do it themselves?
And then gets halfway through it and then calls the Geek Squad.
Forget this. I am not messing with this.
Yeah, exactly. I've been there.
Okay, great. Let me ask you one more question here. So one of the problems that we're seeing here is that when you started to talk about your framework, you talked about 5 different types, of content. And so when we go into problems, we often hear companies try to, basically they say, companies try to do the best they can to say why they're great and do whatever possible to kind of like push down their weaknesses. You know what I mean? I feel like they're like, hey, you know what? If I expose that, they're just going to say, you know what? These guys, I'm going to plant a seed of doubt in their mind.
Great question,
how do you approach that?
That elephant in the room is already there. And people notice the elephant. You can't sweep an elephant under a dang rug. It's an elephant. And so every business gets questions that start with, is it true that somebody told me that, your competitor said that, right? So like with fiberglass pools, Our fiberglass pool's ugly. Our fiberglass pool's cheap. Your competitor said fiberglass pools pop out of the ground, right? Now, I have a choice. Once again, I can allow my competitor to dictate those terms. In other words, dictate what the marketplace knows to be true in their mind. Or I can address it. And so, of course, what do? I addressed it. We leaned into those negatives. And what's so fascinating is it's only when someone is interested in buying something that they research what's wrong with it. The only person in the world that's researching problems with HubSpot is either the person that is using HubSpot and is having a problem, or the person that wants to buy HubSpot and is learning about the problems that HubSpot has. That's it. If someone is getting ready to sign a contract to use whatever, Microsoft Dynamics, they're not researching HubSpot problems. They're researching problems with Microsoft Dynamics. You see what I'm saying? This is what we have to understand.
Absolutely, yeah.
This is why it goes back to the buyer's not dumb. They're going to figure it out. They're going to ask the question from somebody. I sure hope they ask us, and I sure as heck hope we've got a good answer waiting for them.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things you talked about in your book was, I think you called it like fear brainstorming, like where you actually get your leaders together and then you basically, hey, let's try to beat our clients to these questions or prospective buyers to these questions, and let's hit them before they can even come up with them, because we're going to address them early.
That's right. The greatest way in life to resolve a concern is to address it before it becomes a concern.
Address it.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Now, does that have any like, and once again, I know you've said this like at least a few times, like the consumers aren't dumb, but like if you go too far, like are you planting seeds of doubt, or creating things that the consumer may not have thought of, or like what's the strategy behind that?
I mean, there's very few examples of too far to me. Like one example of too far is, let's say your company filed bankruptcy 6 years ago, and ever since then you've had no problems and you're doing well. Would I sit there and talk about how we filed bankruptcy 6 years ago? No, I would not.
Not at all.
Right? Even though one person a year asked me about us filing bankruptcy, that's not enough to constitute really leaning into it.
Right.
But I was getting, it goes back to they ask you answer. If you're getting the question often, and you can define often for your business however you want to, but if you're getting it enough, especially more than once, then now is the time to say, okay, there's a pattern here. Now we got to make the choice. Do we address it or do we not?
Gotcha. Yeah. And I guess that's, that supports pretty much your argument, is that by addressing it, you're creating transparency, you're building trust, and you're, basically, moving that customer or potential customer closer to a buying decision with you.
That's exactly right.
All right, so another question I have, and this is near and dear to my heart just because I'm on the sales side of the business. I personally love this approach, but I'm interested in your perspective. So companies sort of believe that they shouldn't share price until the end of the sales pitch, because if they feel that you're upfront with your pricing, you're going to scare off a potential sales target. One of the quotes from the book, and I think is fantastic, and it really highlights kind of a weakness in any industry, is that fewer than 10% of all businesses in the world address pricing and costs on their company website. Right, so just kind of take me through the psychology of why we should talk money upfront and early, and even on websites.
Yeah, so if you think about why companies like this, it's because in their mind, they are in control of the sales process. Folks, the sales process, for the most part, is completely dead. And today, there's this thing called the buying process. And so the buyer really is in charge of the buying experience. So we know that buyers do, on average, 80% of their research before they reach out to a salesperson. During that research, we know from all the studies that they want to have a sense for budget. We also know that if they don't get a sense for budget from a company during that 80%, the chances that they reach out to that company are dramatically less. So it is way more risky, and you entail way more losses by ignoring the cost price conversation. Now, to your point, we still want to build as much value as possible. This is why when my typical client produces a cost price article on their website, it's going to be 1,500 words or more, because you're really teaching all the elements: what drives costs up, what drives costs down, why some companies are expensive, why some companies are cheap, where do you fall roughly. Give ranges, give senses for projects and what they might spend. You don't have to back yourself in a corner, but you do have to be willing to at least give them a sense for things. And ultimately, that's the minimum that everybody really wants. And most people are pretty happy with that if they at least say, you know what, now I at least have a sense for what I'm going to spend. And also, Todd, it just goes back to the golden rule. Golden rule says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Well, marketing really benefits from that rule. In fact, anybody benefits from that rule for the last 2,000 years or more. So, point being is, let's just say to ourselves, okay, would I appreciate it if they took the time to explain those things to me? Yes, I would. Okay, well then let's figure out how to do it. Instead of debating should we do it when we already know we should, the debate should be on, okay, what exactly do we say in order to check the boxes so they feel satiated without putting ourselves in a corner.
One of the things that I wanted to kind of tell you this one quick story, because I think that when I start to think about price, we've done this little thing where it kind of exposes sort of what is underlying, why the price is what the price is. And so I have this thing, it's called the Dental Marketing Boot Camp. And essentially, I started this business in 2001. A good contact of mine was giving me dental leads all the time. And what I was finding is kind of what it takes to win in the dental marketing space. And unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, the deliverables that it takes to essentially generate leads, nurture leads, convert leads, is way more time and energy than the average budget of a dental client. And so I created the Dental Marketing Bootcamp to basically say, hey, you know what? Like, you guys are looking for this solution to try to get more leads to your practice, but there's tons of marketing companies out here that say that they can do it for $1,000 or maybe $2,000 a month. But then what I started to do is I started to say, look, these are the deliverables that are needed to move the needle. And so let's just say, hypothetically, I need 2 to 3 blogs a month. And then I got to do social media. And then I got to do a newsletter or whatever that is, right? What I did is I put the deliverables on the board and I said, hey, to build a blog, I got to research, I got to write, I got to edit, I got to SEO optimize, I got to get approved by you, I got to re-revise, and then I got to republish, stuff like that. And then I just started to do an hours analysis on that. I'm like, if you start to look at the hours analysis and all the deliverables that we both agree that are going to move to work, what you're going to find here is that unless you're paying your guy like $10 an hour, you can't do this type of stuff, the things that we agreed upon, for $2,000 a month. It's just not physically possible. And so this is why the prices are what they are, because if you try to still do all these deliverables, you're going to be paying your guy, the person who's doing it, like $10 an hour. And you know what? You're not going to get results with a writer who's writing at $10 an hour. And so what I was doing with justifying the price is saying, look, this is the price because of these deliverables. These are how the deliverables are made, right? And then what's left for margin, or what's left for what are you going to be paying your people? And when they sort of saw how the sausage is made, they started to say, you know what? I understand how the price is what the price is. But I think they don't know, and so sometimes they'll see the price and be like, oh my gosh, you charge $1,200 just for a single blog? I'm like, well, if it's required, yeah.
Well, to me, what you were doing, it wasn't just that you were justifying the price, you were also educating the marketplace on something they simply don't know. A dentist doesn't have a class on marketing their practice when they're in university. it's not part of the deal. So they don't know all that's entailed in an effective digital marketing strategy and campaign, right? And so if we allow them to live in a state of ignorance, they're going to choose somebody that's $2,000 a month and has all these promises that comes with it because they didn't know any better. And once again, what happened to that industry? And this happens over and over, right? Because of ignorance, a deliverable, a product or a service was commoditized. What decommoditizes? Exactly what you just explained, Chris. Teaching the marketplace as to what defines value and what goes into something. And by doing that, somebody can have a light bulb moment and say, okay, now I understand.
Exactly. I think that that's one of the missing pieces is that if you turn it from a price discussion to a learning or a teaching opportunity, it's a paradigm shift.
You know, I think the other aspect of price, you know, especially from a sales perspective, is that I think we can agree that, you know, there's good fit and there's bad fit customers for your business, right? So dealing with pricing up front, sort of, you know, almost from a disqualification process helps that, you know, because you're kind of figuring out like who's not a good fit for your company. So like if you wait until the end, kind of like my original question, well, you just spent all this time, you know, educating only to find out that not a good fit, right? So there's like to your point, like I want to do right by you, like as a salesperson, and you're my customer, and doing right by you is being upfront with, you know, what our product costs, what it costs for you from a time perspective, what the contract terms are, like all these things that you want to kind of just be upfront about so that you know what you're getting into when you engage with us. To me, I love to do that, and I love to do it early because I want to find out on the first call whether or not it's a good fit. And I think pricing is a huge component to making that, you know, figuring out that relationship. And then you can move on to all the other facets of the business.
Right.
Yeah, I think they do because, like, I mean, you know, everybody's working from home, and I don't know about you, but I have less time than ever. For some reason, I don't know why. I'm not commuting as much, but I have less time. So be respectful of my time, and I'll be respectful of yours. Yeah.
Yep. And it's weird how it does. I don't know how to describe it, but all of the other teaching things, you get a lot of people nodding their head and stuff like that. Once you are getting into the price conversation, it's amazing how you sort of know what you got. And what I mean by that is that if they are completely resistant to the price and it's just way, you know, it's just way out of their league or something like that, or they're just people that are, you know, are going to be very price resistant just in general, it's just how they're wired. If you can get to that early enough, I think it exposes a little bit more honesty into the conversation. Do you know what I mean? Do you see that as well, Marcus? Because like, I just probably know a lot of people that are like, yeah. And then you start, they're dying to say, very cool, but what's it cost? You know what I mean? Like until they always feel like they're not going to like open up until they know, hey, what's this thing actually going to cost?
And that's where we are. And that's why I suggest that most websites should have a pricing tab in their navigation bar, because that's going to be the highest viewed page of your website, most likely. Mm-hmm. Even more so than the homepage, because people will go back to that page more than once. They will go back to it again and again. Mm-hmm. Anybody listens to this will see exactly what I'm talking about if they just do it. And so, but it goes back to, listen, we're not saying here just slap a number. We're saying teach the marketplace, answer the questions well, define what value looks like, help them see the full picture, assume ignorance on their part in terms of really understanding the industry as a whole and all the price considerations. And if you do that, you're gonna build that value, and you're gonna certainly stand out from everybody else. You'll have given more than certainly all your competitors are giving.
Let me ask you the last question. And this is something I don't know how to describe it, but when I get to this part of your thing, I sort of cringe. And what I mean by that is that you are willing to share information about your own competitors. You know what I mean? It's like if you I can hear it in the back of my mind, clients that say, you know what, if I share too much information about my competitors and my competitors are better than me, now I'm taking clients that come to me and I'm selling them. You know what I mean? So like, walk me through that.
this is going to almost feel redundant, but that's because principles, most questions are like dirt roads that lead back to a main point, right? And so most questions lead back to principles if you allowed the principle to guide you. So the principle that we're talking about here is answer your customers' questions the best you can. Okay, that's the principle. They ask, you answer. Now, most people have been asked before, hey, I'm looking at you and I'm also looking at such and such. Tell me, how do you compare? Or I'm looking at this option and they're suggesting this option. Tell me, which should I choose? Or I'm looking at a Ford, I'm looking at a Chevy, which should I choose? Like, constantly. And sometimes folks will say to me, yeah, but they don't want our opinion on that. BS! Otherwise, they wouldn't ask you in the sales process your opinion on it. Your salespeople get asked all the freaking time these questions. So they want to know your opinion. Now, part of that, though, is they're testing you to gauge really how honest are you. And so let me give you an example. Like, you all understand the inbound space really well. And because, like, our agency shows up within that, the HubSpot top tier agencies, we get compared with New Breed and SmartBug a lot. So we wrote an article comparing ourselves with New Breed and SmartBug, competitors of ours. And any agency really is a competitor of ours in some way, shape, or form. And we didn't say a negative word about them because that's not what we do and that's not what I suggest anybody does. But there's no question the agencies aren't the same thing. They have different specialties. Each one says clearly what their specialties are. And so we openly talk about that. And then we talk about how we differ from them, which we differ greatly because we're a completely different type of agency. We're more of a coaching consulting agency, right? And so the point is that article has been very effective for us. And many of the most profitable pieces of content I've ever done have been about competition. But again, the key is we don't speak negative. We stick to the facts. And doing this allows you to just stand out so dramatically. And once again, you know, there's different ways to do this. Let me give you an example. With my pool company, as you read in the book, I wrote this article, Who are the Best Pool Builders in Richmond, Virginia? I did that because I know tons of people are searching that. So that's found in our learning center, but it's not like I'm like throwing that on the homepage of my website. You know what I'm saying? It's one of those things where it is like you can read it, it brings people in, but I'm not highlighting it all day long on my homepage. And that's my point. Some of these things, when we talk about the competition, I'm not putting that right in front of their face, but I do want it to be there, especially from a search perspective if they're asking the question.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because the point that you've made from the beginning is that because of all the information that's out there, they're probably asking that question. So who not better to find the answer from than you?
That's right. Always goes back to the same thing.
All right. Well, listen. Yeah, that's fantastic. I really appreciate that, Marcus. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up that you'd like to share with our audience?
I would just say, folks, remember this. It's dumb not to dumb it down. You don't need to try to sound smart online. I never try to sound smart.
Okay.
We try to seek communion, same root as communication there, with our audience. And the moment you try to sound smart is the moment oftentimes we start to look dumb. So keep that in mind, and remember too that you're never going to be great at all the things. You don't have to be everywhere.
Right.
At River Pools, we became the most trafficked swimming pool website in the world, and I didn't do a lick of social media. And to this day, I still don't do much with it. Because I wanted to be the best at one thing. I wanted to be the best at answering questions through text and video on our website, and that's how we just completely dominated the industry. So be careful when you hear folks say, you got to be everywhere. Just trust me, you don't, but you got to do one or two things really well. Know your lane, do that thing really well, develop yourself there, and you'll find that you tend to thrive.
All right. Well, that is very insightful. Thank you very much for your time. I know Chris has been talking about you for about a year now, so I'm excited that we finally got you back on the show. What we'd love to do when you publish this next book, hopefully by the end of the year, we'd love to have you back on and talk us through this new marriage of these two books basically coming together as well. I think that'd be really cool.
The love child.
To our audience, thank you very much for joining us. This content, we are pushing this out constantly, so like, subscribe, comment. We would love to hear from you. And once again, Marcus, thank you so much for your time. Look forward to connecting with you again in the future.
Okay, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this video. What I wanted to do now is share something with you that we believe is very special. We call it the Ferritech unique process. What you'll see on this page is our entire roadmap that we've built over the last 21 years. We've implemented this process for nearly all of our inbound marketing clients. And we believe that if you implement some of these strategies into your own marketing, you're going to have tremendous results. We developed this page to not only be in video format, but also in text and chapter format as well. Now, when it's done effectively, this process is going to help your organization systematically generate leads, nurture leads into clients, and then convert those clients into raving fans of your products and services, and also your mission and value. If you have any questions or comments about anything that you've read or seen in the previous video, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us and we'll have one of our specialists walk through this with you step by step. You can do that by reaching out to us at info@ferritech.com. So once again, the domain to find our unique process is www.ferritechuniqueprocess.com.